Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of the Third and Short Overtime podcast. Apologies last week. Obviously, I couldn't make it because I was a bit sick. Luckily, a good friend, Matt, stepped in and did a fantastic job with the three lads who will join us again this week, JP, Bones and Mark. And obviously, last week, I missed out on the offensive line talk. This time, that we're going to go for the NFL defenses just in general, same as last week that the lads did. We're going to look at some good ones, some emerging ones, and some bad ones. But before that, we're just going to do a brief little open discussion about what makes good defenses, the positions, and a little brief chat on different things that that come to our head on what makes a good defense and things like that. So, and then obviously we'll finish out on the show. Obviously, we're a big week in the NFL, and we'll look at the final rosters. Obviously, all the teams trimmed down to the final 53-man rosters, and we'll look at some good moves, some bad moves that we think, obviously our opinions, and obviously some people who've been picked up off of the waiver wire. In general, I think I'll be mentioning someone that the Seahawks picked up from the 49ers, which seems like for me is at least a decent pickup. A few 49ers fans didn't seem happy about letting him go. We'll find out what John thought about that later. But yeah, let's get straight into it. The NFL defense, it's a big part of winning Super Bowls. Obviously we all love watching the offense. It's beautiful, it's sexy, at times, but never write off a defense. The defense has won many a Super Bowl, as I can vouch for. The Legion of Boom at the Seahawks. Obviously, I know Russell Wilson was there, and he did a fantastic job. But if anyone knows NFL, we all know that the Legion of Boom was the main part of getting us to that Super Bowl and winning it, especially in the Super Bowl final against the Broncos. So I'll come to you first, Mark. What makes a good defense? With your pass rush and your coverage. What are you looking for? To make it, starting off and making a defense from scratch, what you're looking for first?
In today's NFL, with teams that are set up to pass first these days, when I look at a defense, I look at athletes first of all. I've always said this before, when drafting defenders, when looking at the draft and when looking at free agency to put bodies on your defense, look to primarily get athletes first and foremost. We hear a lot about coaches talking about their defenses playing faster, and that's because the NFL now is a passing game. And what we're seeing now is we're not seeing standard, running backs who just run with the ball. We're seeing coordinators getting, creative and flexing running backs out of wide receiver positions in the cases of Kamara and McCaffrey. We're looking at tight ends who are really wide receivers and a tight end body in the cases of Darren Waller and Kyle Pitts, who's just come into the NFL. And of course, we've now got I suppose it's always been there, but it hasn't been there in the quantity what it is now. I mean, even way back, like Steve McNair and Steve Young and players like that, like Randall Cunningham, who could run the ball at quarterback. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing 12 teams at least who have got quarterbacks who are genuine running threats. We're seeing 2 more come into the NFL this year in Trey Lance and Justin Fields. And to be honest with you, Trevor Lawrence is no slouch at rushing the ball, and neither is Zach Wilson. You know what I mean? So add that into the mix of Russell Wilson, throw in Lamar Jackson, toss in Deshaun Watson. Dak Prescott can run the ball a little bit. And you'll understand now that the way that the NFL is getting faster and more creative. So building a good defense, you need speed and you need athleticism. I feel if you've got speed and you've got athleticism, you can make up for some of those trick plays, so to play, or them curve balls that are coming. Because you're going to need times when you're going to need to correct yourself. The way that blocking concepts are on everything today, and the way that teams line up with players that can do multiple things, there's going to be times when you read the play wrong at the end, and you're going to need speed and athleticism to get back in the key. Another thing, before I move on from that, I feel that makes good defenses in the NFL. I personally think that pass coverage is more important than pass rush. This is a flip from what we used to see. People used to say, build your defense from the front back. I kind of go build it from the back front now, because it's such a passing game. When quarterbacks are dropping back over 35 times and throwing the ball, you know what I mean? Or you haven't got time now to expect that you're going to get the quarterback more than 4 or 5 times a game. Well, the way that the NFL is and the way that Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson and Dak Prescott and them are slinging the ball down the field these days, and Josh Allen, you know what I mean? No, that means there's 34 big players on the board. And I think what's more important now is having lots of players like what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had, who were really sticky in coverage. Because to be honest with you, I think it's more important that you stop the pass as opposed to prevent the pass being thrown these days, because the pass is going to get thrown.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on some great points there that I think deserve touching on again. Like the versatility thing is a big one. We see a lot of players now that are very on the defensive side of the ball. We hear it we sideline to sideline linebackers. People who can clear the whole field, like the whole 50 odd whatever yards the width of the field is. We see these players that can line up almost anywhere. You get your safeties that play inside the box, outside the box. You don't know what they're going to do. Like each play, they can play linebacker, but it comes down to, like you mentioned Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. Coach is looking for mismatches on the offense. Like you're looking for just to set your player up in the best position to get the yardage, to get the gain. And defenses now need to adapt to these mismatches by having more and more versatile defensive players in the positions that are getting mismatched. Linebackers that can't keep up with certain running backs out of the backfield and stuff need to be swapped out for defensive backs. And I think that's really big, is like this versatility and being able to disguise what your defense is as much as offensives want. And we discussed this when we were talking about gadget players on the offensive side of the ball. You want to disguise what you're doing as much as you can on the defense, the same way you do on offense. The more you can make it look like something it's not, the more you can trick your opponent into running a play that favors the strategy you're actually going for. So having like 4 men line up to rush the passer and one of them drops back into coverage and stuff like that it's very important. But anyway, I've quickly gone on there for a bit too long. But yeah, that's why I think I agree that versatility is huge.
Yeah, and in reply to that, like the new laws and the new rules that we're seeing come in the NFL, they favour offenses heavily. The new PI rules, the new, like how much contact you can have, you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff, really favours now. It really does favour the offensive side of the ball, because that's what the NFL wants. People come to the NFL, the majority of fans will come to the NFL to watch these big plays, to see these 50-yard touchdowns, to see these big chunk plays, to watch your Patrick Mahomes, to watch Lamar Jackson break off an 80-yard run, or Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen launch a 60-yard pass. And the NFL commissioners know that, and that's why the rules change. And what we see is we do see rules today, particularly in pass interference and stuff like that, which is heavily stacked against defensive team, like against defense now. It is very much an offense-first league.
I think Mark's hit the nail on the head. One of the things I was going to say was the rules now largely favour offenses, and that's why it's so difficult to make a good defense these days. I think one of the other things, sorry, excuse me. Well, 2 major things really. You guys touched on, is it pass rush or coverage that makes a good defense? You can't really have one or the other now. You do have to have a mix of both. You're not going to have all-world talent at both positions. But the days of being able to have a fearsome pass rush and trot out some CFL rejects at corner, you can't do that anymore. You need some mix of the two, and it makes them really hard to find. And they come at a premium now. You look at some of the big contracts that have been handed out. A large part of the big contracts are the edges, the corners. And the other side to that as well is where you wouldn't have previously seen a lot of money being spent one time. The third corner, or what is now known as the nickel corner or the slot corner, we'll talk about schemes in a little bit, I know, but so much money now goes into these slot corner types, largely because of what Mark and Bones have both said about needing to be sort of position agnostic, if you like, be able to play in several different areas, but also cover like tight ends who are basically playing as receivers. You think about your Wallers, your Kittles, your Kelseys, those types of players. You can't cover those guys with probably 99% of the linebackers in the league. Some linebackers can do it, and they're the ones that get paid the most. We've seen Leonard at the Colts and Warner at the Niners get paid a ton of money this offseason, largely because they can cover. But otherwise than that, you're covering them with DBs, and that's why you're seeing these sort of hybrid safety/corner type players who are really making quite a bit of money and getting drafted high now as well. You see guys that projected a nickel spot going in the first round now, and that would never have happened probably even 5 years ago. The football world is changing. Positionless defense is a massive thing now.
fully agree, John. Couldn't agree more, mate. You know, like the money that we're seeing going to nickel and teams who are going, you know, like just last year, the Dolphins drafted a guy called Noah Mahogany in the first round, at the back end of the first round. He played nickel for them. You know, like the Broncos have 2 starting corners, but yet still put Patrick Surtain. And what you're seeing is teams drafting talent on top of talent. You know, like to try and get as many corners or as many good coverage players out there. What I would say the defensive line's becoming more than anything is it's becoming if the player fits kind of player. For example, what you're seeing pass rush specialists and you're seeing run stopping specialists on the defensive lines. Whereas one day you would trot somebody out and they would be out there 90% of the snaps on the defensive line. Now what you're seeing people who just come in on third down, you know, like who are just pass rush specialists. And you might take out the guy after 2 or 3 snaps, and then you just put him in on third down when it's like 3rd and 6 or 3rd and 7, for example. You know, like it's becoming very scheme specific. It's becoming not so much, in fact, scheme specific, situational specific. You know, like John, you said something about linebackers there. The job of a linebacker today is nigh on impossible, because what you're expected to do as a linebacker in the NFL today, this is why players like Bobby Wagner, Leonard, Fred Warner, Micah Parsons, who I believe who just came in the draft, worth their weight in gold, is you're expected to be able to put your head on a physical runner like Nick Chubb and stop him in the hole. You're expected to cover a tight end who's a freak of nature, like Darren Waller, you know, who runs 4.4 speed. You know what I mean? Like 6'6", you know, 240 pounds. Then what you're meant to do is you're meant to be able to pick up shifty players who run out into the flats and can beat you on all sorts of routes, like your Alvin Kamara's and your Christian McCaffrey's. So, you know, like your linebackers in today's NFL, this is why we see so many situal linebackers, because to find one who's a do-it-all, like Bobby Wagner, like I believe Micah Parsons is, and Fred Warner and Darius Leonard, they're hard to find somebody who can do all of that. Because when offensive coordinators are looking to find weaknesses in the defense, that's where they're looking at second level and what they can exploit there.
All fantastic points, lads. You know, that is a magnificent podcast. You know what I mean? That's what we want to see from you guys. You know, that is talking defense at its best. So what we're going to do here now is pull up a few. We're just going to do the basic schemes. So Bones is going to pull up a 4-3. Here we go now. That's like a 4-3, you know, with your your cornerbacks and your safeties. Obviously, you can mix up your corners and your nickels how you want to at the back. Obviously, with your 4 defensive linemen, you've got your defensive tackle, defensive edge. So I'm going to come back to you, Bones, and just talk about the defensive line on a 4-3. You know, you've got your 2 edge and you've got defensive tackle. What do you what skills do you want from, like, especially defensive tackles? You know, like you got your run stuffers there and stuff, and your defensive edge, and on your rushing the passer on the edge there on your 4-3. What do you like about the 4-3 hybrid? I know you were Detroit Lions with a 3-4, so I'll go with you with a 4-3.
Well, the 4-3, I mean, you see this more in your guys' side of the league, to be honest. In the pass-heavy league, you see a lot of the 4-3. You see a lot of the where you want your defensive line to do all of the pass rush. You don't want to bring your linebackers in on the line, which is what you see in 3-4 defenses. Is a lot more linebackers coming down, joining the line, and mixing it up. Whereas it's a different sort of you've got 2 different defensive tackles in a 4-3, whereas obviously in the 3-4 you've only got the 1, the nose tackle. You've got people who need to like position up against the guard. You've got the 3 tack and the nose tackle in the 4-3 that obviously line up in different places and have different roles, and it's a very interesting defense. And like you say, it's not one my team really runs, so I feel like my knowledge on it is pretty weak. So I'd be better off like passing it over to JP or someone like a 49ers fan who definitely does run a 4-3.
It's a funny one because I think Mark has just made the point privately. For most of the years I've been watching the Niners, we actually ran a 3-4, but the last sort of the Shanahan era, we've been running this bizarre sort of 4-3. It is a 4-3, but it's a 4-3 with slightly different setup to that, kind of like a wide 9 setup, which we've talked a little bit about on off screen. But the wide 9, you're getting your ends out wider, your edge players out wider to give them a better chance to rush the passer. That, of course, puts a bigger strain on the inside guys. Your defensive tackles, they have to be pretty super players. The thing I like about the 4-3, the 3-4, I think is more versatile. You could do more with it. You can kind of shift your fronts around a little bit. But I think 4-3, you can be deceptively simple. If you've got a good front four, and I think we're going to talk about defenses in a bit, but I'm certainly going to speak up for my guys when it comes to that. If you've got a good front four, you can do pretty much anything with the athletes behind it. You can run what's a pretty basic sort of man-to-man or even like cover 3 style shell, and you can do it. You can do a lot of damage without really having to go into like massively complicated calls, and that brings in Mark's point earlier of like using players for certain situations. You can rotate your D-line. You can bring in, perhaps three different substitutions on the D-line. I think certainly in the 49ers terminology, it was Alpha, Bravo, and Turbo Squad. And Turbo Squad was all the speed rushers. So you guys like your D Fords, your Nick Bosa's, those kind of guys. It's simple, but it makes it easier for players to be able to drop in and play it pretty much straight off. There isn't a lot to read if you're playing defensive end in a 4-3. You're getting after the quarterback. You don't have to worry about coverage. In a 3-4, you might be a pass rushing linebacker, but you may also be asked to drop into coverage on occasion. So there's a simplicity to the 4-3 that when I was sort of growing up watching the NFL, I didn't particularly like, because I like the complicated schemes, things like that. But I think sometimes when you've got a certain amount of young talent, it's just good to let them fly, let them play the game. And I think that's why you see a lot of the younger looking teams, sort of the up and comers. A lot of them are playing 4-3s. It's the old school teams that play a 3-4 now in a lot of cases, or old school coaches. Anyway, that's all I got on the 4-3. So I don't know if anybody else wants to come in, but that's pretty much all I could say at the moment.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick, simple point. What we're seeing there is we're seeing a 4-3 base package. It's very, very rare that a team will line up in the base package. Like when we take people like Gus Bradley, who's now at my radars, he lined up in the base package less than 25% of the time. You know what I mean? What we'll be seeing this formation never sticks like this. It's very rare that you'll see the linebackers lined up in them positions. What you see is you see teams who either adopt a 4-3 over or 4-3 under. Like in particular, we drop an under, which means that one of those linebackers comes down and makes a 5th defensive lineman. It's called a Leo in our system. And what he is effectively is an overhang linebacker who plays on the line, standing up predominantly. It's very, very rare you'll see 4-3 bases like that. There's another system, which is probably what we see most of the time, which I'm going to discuss later on. So I'll get off that and I'll leave that for that system. But yeah, 4-3, although we might see it, like on NFL, when we're watching the game on a Monday night, it'll say this is your starting defensive lineup. It'll be the base defense lineup. It's very, very rare that all them players will be on that field in that position of what we're showing now. It's just the base, and teams don't stay in base very long these days.
No, like you say, there's so many different chess pieces and moving around of like defenses now that like it's there's so many different teams that play different things. The moving linebackers around. Like bringing safeties up into the box. It's amazing to watch. Really, as like especially me as someone who loves the defense side of the ball. It's just fantastic. So, Bones, if you move on to the next one, this is where obviously you're going to come in now. I called you out for the 4-3, but apologies for that. You are the 3-4 man at Detroit. Talk us through the 3-4 basic. Obviously, again, things can change around, but this is a 3-4, like as it normally would say on the logo thing.
Yeah, it's like it's as Mark said, the base package isn't often what we see. This is just how we see it shown in the packages on the NFL programming, and it helps to explain it this way, I guess, in a way. But the 3-4 is like it's a lot more about having these outside linebackers who can act as defensive end, or they can drop back into pass coverage. I know we mentioned that sometimes the 4-3 can bring the 5th man inside. You see a lot more linebacker usage in the 3-4, and it can disguise as a bunch of different things. It's like JP said, though, we see mixtures of these things. Like we see 3-4 teams that will happily slot in a several 4-3 players and draft players specifically, like Mark mentioned, to rotate in and play these roles. Like you'll draft a pass rush specialist at a defensive tackle that will come in on the 4-3 plays, or you'll draft an outside linebacker or an inside linebacker that's specifically good at rushing the passer for a 3-4 play with a gap for the middle linebacker to come rushing in. Like you see a lot of different stuff, and it's it's obviously this one's one we see more against run-heavy teams. Like it tends to be more common for run-stopping kind of defenses. But yeah, it's a good defense. It's one that my team runs. It's a solid base package. But yeah, I like it. I thought I'd bring it up.
No, this is a good point, Bones. Do you know, when I think about this defense, I think it's got a lot less moving parts. I think when you see a 3-4, you genuinely know who the three men on the front are 90% of the time. You know what I mean? That's what I think. It's not so much like your southern players in and out, particularly not on that front three. What you're tasked to do in a front three here is actually not get the passer. Where in a 4-3, you are asked to get passer. The point of a 3-4 front is to eat up the blockers. I think of players like Casey Hampton, who played for the Steelers and who was a nose tackle, who demanded double teams every single time. And then you look at what the Steelers are pretty famous for this front. This is what the Steelers play. And what they're asked for historically is asked for defensive linemen who will eat up blockers. By that, what they mean is, are they taking two people or more to block them? And what that allows your outside linebackers to have a run and some momentum to be able to get past the offensive tackles and to get the quarterback. I think that this scheme is a bit more rigid than the 4-3, as in there isn't that many pieces that move in and out of it. You'll generally see these players on the field the majority of the time. Although you do have some players who'll come in for specific passing downs. What we see strong safeties and secondary players playing those middle linebackers positions. Players like Dion Buchanan, who was at the Cardinals a number of years back, played in a 3-4 at the Cardinals. He was a strong safety, and he was put in there for his coverage ability and his speed perimeter. I don't know if we're going to talk about this defense. So we're still doing nickel after this, because nickel is the package that we see NFL defenses in most of the time. So I'll let Bones put up the graphic if we're all going to talk about it. Yeah, this is what we see NFL defenses playing most of the time. Nickel. The nickel package basically is where you substitute a linebacker and you bring in an extra corner. So what you've got is you've got three corners on the field, you've got two linebackers on the field, you've got your three safeties on the field, and you've got your defensive linemen. And why do we see so much nickel? Because we see so much slot wide receivers. So if you've got three wide receivers on the field, the last thing you want is a linebacker lined up against a wide receiver. So we see defensive coordinators playing in nickel predominantly most of the time. Really what they should do on NFL games now is just do away with showing the base defense and showing what their nickel package will be. And to go back to John's point earlier, this is why nickel cornerbacks or free safeties who can drop down and play in nickel, like Tyrann Mathieu, are getting paid, because they're now on the field the majority of the time. And in the case of Tyrann Mathieu, who plays free safety and nickel free safety, means that he never comes off the field. And this is why they're getting paid, because they're hot commodity.
I think that's a few schemes that you see in the NFL. We didn't want to touch too much on it, because obviously we during the season and in the future we want to try and deep dive into some of these positions and really look how it's developed over the years, and teams that play it, and different schemes moving forward, like the 4-3 or what it moves into, different aspects of it. That's something that we really want to dig into. So we've just briefly touched on that. We will come back to that later in the season. So next we're going to move on to just briefly, obviously the positions, and obviously you've got the defensive line, whether you're playing like mentioned, obviously if it's a 3-4, you've got the nose tackle, and then obviously if it's 4-3, you've got the two defensive tackles and the edges. So I'm going to come to you, JP. Obviously, edge rushers, you've got a fantastic one over at 49ers. When he's on the pitch, What do you like about a good edge rusher? Someone who can who's bendy or physical. What are the key attributes that you like from an edge rusher?
I think if you're going to build a good defensive line, you need some mixture of both. Speed is great, but you need a power guy too. I think this is one of the things that if you can get somebody that's a hybrid of the two, and I think when you're referring to Bosa, he probably does fall into that category. So does his brother. They are fast, but they are strong too. there aren't many players like that. It's hard to find those type of players. That's why they go at the top of the drafts. Most guys kind of pigeonhole. They fall into one category. I think of on the other side of the 49ers defense, D Ford. Now, when he's on the field, he can be destructive, but he is a speed rusher. There is not much more to his game than that. I think you're looking for a few things really, but a large part of it is a mental thing, just that desire to get to the quarterback. Some players have it, some players don't. I can think of a lot of draft prospects. Sorry, Jets fans, but I think Vernon Goldson springs to mind, who looked great as an athlete, fast, strong, pretty quick twitch, but when it came to playing in the actual game, just didn't want to beat offensive linemen, didn't want to take on offensive linemen. So I think you can be a good edge rusher without that stuff. But make no mistake, you need to be a pretty what's the word I'm looking for? A pretty nimble athlete to be an edge rusher. You need to have bend. You need to have some speed. You don't necessarily have to be a speed demon. I think there are some edge rushers that prove that. But you do need some speed. You need the ability to bend. You don't need to be stiff. You need to be able to move. You need to be able to, your hand placement needs to be right. You need to unsettle the tackles. These are all things that I think they're hard to evaluate as well. I'm just going to touch on that. We see a lot of edge rushers come out of college that don't do anywhere near as well in the NFL. And it's largely because of the player college tackles. A lot of college tackles, because they're slow, foot speed or something like that, can easily be taken over by somebody faster and maybe a little bit stronger than they are. It's the equivalent to football where somebody looks really good at 14 years old because he's bigger and stronger than everybody else. But when he gets to the senior side at age 18, 19, he's suddenly not got that. He's suddenly not got that impact anymore. So I think edges are hard to evaluate, but you're looking for that. You're looking for those physical traits, but it also needs to manifest itself in actual production on the field. I think what we've started to see, though, is that certainly in the more recent drafts, guys that have had one good season as an edge rusher are going high in the draft because there's that focus on production, but you don't see it consistently from a lot of college players. So I don't know. Sorry, Mark, I'm going to do it because I think if I don't, you will. I think of the Raiders drafting somebody like Cleve Ferrell, who was a good player. I'm not saying he's not. He's a solid NFL player, but he isn't an edge rusher because you can see that in his play. He's about as stiff as they come as an edge rusher. He's probably a decent power rusher, but you ain't drafted that, or you shouldn't be drafted that in the first round, unless, of course, they're playing inside. But somebody else is going to talk about D tackles, so I won't steal that one too much. But yeah, I think it's just athletic trait, desire to get to the quarterback, because that's all you're doing as an edge player, really. You're in for those passing downs.
See, as John, this goes back to the point I was making earlier on. When you're drafting defensive players, draft athletes. Draft athletes, drafts freaks of nature. Go out and pick up your Micah Parsons. Go get your Jason Oa's. Go get guys who are athletic freaks of nature. That's what you want, because that's what ultimately that's going to cover up a lot of holes in the NFL today. When I think about the Raiders selecting, like Cleve Ferrell, and anybody who was my friend then or who listened to me then, I was banging the table so hard for Brian Burns. Brian Burns should have been that pick at number 4. And if it hadn't been Burns, it should have been Montez Sweat. Because what those two players were athletes. They were long, they were fast, they had bend. What Cleve Ferrell has is power and twitch. It's no good having power and twitch if you're so stiff that you can't turn a corner. I think when we watch NFL players in training camp, one of the drills that we're most familiar with is the hoop drill. Where they run around the hoop and they see how tight of a circle they can turn around it. That's flex. Now, how that's transferable to the NFL is that hoop. Think of that hoop as an offensive tackle. And what they're doing is they're getting tight up the offensive tackle, maybe using their length to get an arm on him, while the rest of their body's still going and turning if it's going around that circle. So what they can come in is they can come in on the tightest angle to the quarterback, which means they're covering less distance, which means they're going to get there quickly because the ball's coming out fast. When you've got somebody like Cleve Ferrell, who's as stiff as a board, he's got an inability to turn that circle. He's got the turning circle of a North Sea oil tanker. Now, what he's got an ability to engage with offensive tackles. We saw him do it against Mekhi Becton against the Jets last year. And what he does, when he can engage with an offensive tackle, he's got very good twitch and very good hand usage to get off the block. And like you said, John, he's got very good power to then get through that defensive tackle. But it takes 4 or 5 seconds to be able to do that. And when quarterbacks are letting go of the ball within a second or two, they're too late to the play. This is where it's just not transferable to today's NFL. Quarterbacks are quick. They've normally got all the reads long before. They normally know who they're going to, John, before the ball's even snapped. In the case of what we saw Sam Darnold last week, in the last preseason, Joe Brady knew that he was having trouble in long developing plays, so he had him keying in on receivers earlier. The ball was snapped and it was out his hand. Having good counters and being able to get close and then use your power and leverage to get off the tackle isn't going to cut it in today's NFL. Draft athletes, draft players who are long, draft players who are fast, draft players who are absolute freak of natures. Your Micah Parsons, your Jason Oyes, your Quitty Pays, Gregory Rousseau. Look at the length that guy's got. And look at the strain he put Penny Sewell under in that preseason friendly. That's what you want to draft. The technicians today aren't getting the job done. It's the athletes who are.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I think, there's a lot of those type of players now as well that you are looking at and you go, wow, they've got great explosiveness. They got good athleticism. Can we make them into an edge rusher? They may not have necessarily shown it in college, but can we get it out of them? One thing I did want to mention, I do think it's important. It's hard to evaluate this again at a college level, but try and look for a guy that has more than one pass rush move. You kind of talked about it there with Cleve Farrell. He strikes me as somebody who would be a tremendous bull rush guy, but he has nothing else. There's no club. There's certainly no spin move because he doesn't have the athleticism for it. You need a few weapons in your arsenal to take on guys at an NFL level, unless you're playing a terrible offensive line. But there aren't too many of those. I mean, we talked about those last week, so go and listen to last week if you want to know about that. But be versatile in what you can do, because I can think of a few players who have come in looking really impressive in college, but when you watch the tape, it's all one pass rush move. And ultimately, once an NFL offensive tackle figures that out, they've got nothing else.
So we've touched nicely on edge rushers there. I'll just touch briefly on defensive tackles. We won't leave them out. They are an important piece to the defensive line. Defensive tackle, obviously, if you want them to be able to pass rush, but the run defense, stuffing the run, like big guys, in defensive tackles, like in there. But one thing that I just wanted to touch on briefly, before we move on to linebackers, is when you talk about defensive tackle, they mention a lot pad level. And it's hard for me to show you right now, but if you go watch some videos on pad level, it would benefit you, seeing what a good defensive tackle is, getting that pad level, getting under so you can't be moved backwards, and you get to push these offensive linemen and you get under them. It's like a straight line, kind of like the best way I can line it. Your back is like that and you get right under the pads and you're pushing them back into the quarterback. That's one of the main things you see in the defensive tackle. Like I said, there's a few other things as well, but we've absolutely dissected so much on other things. I'm going to move on to linebackers with Bones. Just one thing quick on linebackers that I just wanted to mention. You see a lot of linebackers as your captain. Someone. Not like your quarterback is, like calling plays on the offense. There's always seems to be a linebacker on most teams that's watching out for schemes like that he thinks are like things are moving like on the offense. Like if he thinks it's going to be a run play or whatever he's thinking, he's reading that. It's really intelligent players. Like your Bobby Wagner's, like obviously for the Seahawks and things like that. This is like Mark was saying, you want them to do everything, like stop the run. Being pass coverage, but they're also watching plays develop as well. This is why the top ones are on so much money. They've got so much going on in their heads, and just appreciate like what top players there are. But obviously, I'll move on to Bones now. What your takes on linebackers?
Well, linebackers are an interesting one, aren't they? Because there's so much for linebackers to do in the league in this day and age, and it depends completely on what your scheme is, as well as to what you expect from your outside, your inside linebackers, your middle linebackers, your middle linebackers. like you just mentioned, they sometimes do get called the quarterback of the defense because they are a lot of the times the person who's calling coverages, calling changes at the line on the play. Like they're the guy doing the audibles on the defense. Realistically, is your Mike linebacker, and you need that person to be intelligent, decisive, explosive, and versatile. And it's a very, 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 very difficult position in today's NFL to find someone to play. Like it's such a hard position. Mark mentioned it himself earlier on. You want them to be able to do everything, and that's nigh on impossible to find. That's why, like you say, Bobby Wagner, what's your guy in the middle called, JP? Fred Warner. Devin White in the Super Bowl, the most recent game we've all had to watch that actually counted for something that everyone remembers. Devin White played unbelievable. He was arguably the MVP of that defense that game, if not that game. But never mind. He was definitely and that is key. Those players have to be unbelievably good, and that is so hard to find in today's NFL. And that's why I mean, you kind of already mentioned it, but it is very important. Like some of the best who have ever played, you Luke Kuechly's, and they're just unbelievable players. They're so good, and they deserve the money they get, and they're so hard to find. It's why every year you'll see me chatting in the chat about what the linebackers are in the draft, because I just want to see good. You got to find them. They're so hard to find. But anyway, I gush.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite positions, linebackers. I remember when I first started watching NFL, I was watching it casually for a couple of years. And it's funny that you should mention Luke Kuechly. And I used to watch Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis at the Panthers. And it was just a pleasure to watch them play at linebackers, who unbelievable athletes at the time, especially when they had Cam Newton making that playoff push. But JP, did you want to add something on linebackers?
Yeah, just an interesting one, because there's a lot of we talked about edges, we talked about athleticism, and obviously linebackers is similar to that. But I do think one of the biggest things about linebackers is the reactions, the instincts. I think you can cover for a bit of a dearth in speed if you are instinctive. I've seen a few players in this preseason. Bones and I have discussed it as well, away from the podcast, where you can see some players that have the athletic ability to get in position to make plays, but don't instinctively do that. Whereas I can think of one or two, and I think my team have probably had one or two that weren't necessarily the most athletic players in the world, but they had the instincts to find the ball. Finding the ball is the key thing at linebacker. Whether you can cover, I suppose it's the same for safeties, which I know Mark is going to cover when he does defensive backs in a second. But it's about that locating the ball, but also just having the instinct to go and make the play, not overthinking the play. That's a rare talent to find, and it's probably why you see a lot of linebackers who get drafted late, because their athletic traits aren't brilliant, but they do actually turn out to be solid NFL players because they have that some players that might be drafted higher probably don't. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that quickly.
It's explosiveness, isn't it? It's the ability to not just stop and look at a play, but explode through the play, hammer that guy into the ground, get him down. That's what you need to see from a linebacker. If they don't have that in them, if they hesitate, you can't hesitate. If you coming down on a running back and you're going to make the tackle and you hesitate, that's that split second a skill position needs to get past you. That moment of hesitation. You see too many linebackers that hesitate, and you just got to blow through the play. You just got to go for it, and that's what I agree, JP. Instinct and just explosiveness is huge at linebacker, I think.
Yeah, it's all good points. Side to side, the pitch as well. It gets you from side to side to make plays on the speed. So moving on to the defensive backs, I know this is a favourite area of Mark. Obviously you've got your cornerbacks. Such a hard position to play. That's why you see a lot of players. It might take them a couple of years, to get used to it in the NFL coming from college. Mark, cornerbacks, go on, talk to me. I know how much you like them.
Love cornerbacks. Watch cornerbacks all the time. I was watching Hard Knocks this week, and I saw Cooper put Diggs in a blender. You know what I mean? I saw him turn and pivot and just absolutely destroy Diggs. Like I was playing corner opposite him. And it made us think, God, I wish I'd got to see the next set of practice reps. Because the truth of the matter is with corners, what you need tenacity. I like corners what I like watching about corners is when a touchdown scored against them, what do they do in the very next series? Because You're going to get targeted no matter who you are, corner in the NFL, and there's people going to catch balls on you. We saw what Hunter Renfrow and what all the talk was that day at training camp when you allegedly put Jalen Ramsey in a blender. The truth of the matter is cornerbacks is the most important skill position in the NFL today. They're probably playing the hardest position. They're the only players who run backwards when everybody else is running forwards. So players are running forwards and they're backpedaling. So imagine the speed and athleticism you've got to do that. Then what they've got to be able to do is they've got to be able to flip their hips. So there's agility. You know what I mean? They've got to be able to track the flight of the ball. They've got to be able to then break as the wide receiver's running their route. They've got to read wide receiver's feet, all whilst running backwards, flipping, and the ball being in the air. Then they've got to do is they've then got to get them around whilst running still, and then make a play on the ball. It takes an incredible amount of skill set to be able to do all of that at the speed of the NFL. So I love watching cornerbacks. And what we see today is we see cornerbacks who have got incredible length. They've got long arms, and most of them are above 6 foot. In fact, if you're sub 6 foot in today's NFL, you're getting put into the nickel. Cornerbacks are long and they're fast and they're big. You've got players like Jamel Dean, who played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Super Bowl. Who is a unit. He's about 220 pounds and about 6'3". He reminds me of a guy who used to play, although I think he's much better than this guy, who played for your team, Jordan, Brandon Browner, who was another big, huge, bulking corner. You know what I mean? And look, cornerbacks today have got it so difficult. What you need to have is you need to have tenacity. You need that chip on your shoulder, like primetime Deion Sanders had. Deion Sanders. You need your name in lights. And that's what cornerbacks need to be. They need to have that attitude. Cornerbacks today won't be on one side of the field anymore. At least if you're a good cornerback, you'll not be. Patrick Peterson, about 10 years ago when he came into the NFL, was one of those corners that I first noticed travelled with the opposing team's wide receiver. It wasn't like you locked down the left-hand side of the field and the corner locked down the right-hand side of the field. It was you go out and lock down Brandon Marshall. It's you go out and lock down, whichever wide receiver is number one on that team. And he would follow them. Larry Fitzgerald, for example, I imagine you would just been following him in and out every single day in training. Wherever Fitzgerald lined up on the offense, Patrick Peterson would have matched him every single day on the defense. He would have played in the nickel. He would have played left. He would have played right. He was following the number one wide receiver on every team. We've seen that now with Jalen Ramsey. They travel, Stephen Gilmore. They travel with the number one wide receiver. And if you've got a number one cornerback who's a shutdown cornerback, it is priceless. If you can bank on that guy to eliminate that half of the field, 9 players out of 10, it is absolutely priceless. This is why we're seeing man coverage corners. Joe Horn go as the first defensive player in the NFL draft these days, because what they can do as man coverage corners is they can go one-on-one with the other team's number one wide receiver continually and all the time. And it's priceless. It's priceless. If you've got that, it's absolutely priceless. That's why these guys are paid a shitload of money. That's why you see Stephen Gilmore and Xavier Howard and Tre'Davious White and Marlon Humphrey. God, but they go on and on with this list, of cornerbacks who have just been paid. Jalen Ramsey, all get over £20 million, because what they do is they shut down their half the field, and you don't know what their half of the field is.
I think you touched on it perfectly there, Mark. I think it's one of them where it's like you can't be soft. You can't be a soft player as a cornerback. Psychologically, we've seen Jalen Ramsey like misplays sometimes and like stuff, but anything like that. You know, he's got to move on. You know, he's got to have that strength of character to move on and say, then forget about that play and keep doing what he needs to do. And then do you ever hear like a cornerback like Jalen Ramsey, if someone mentions something bad, does he ever like say anything about it or bite back? He's talking about the stuff that he did well. You know, that this is the mentality that you have. You know, he's talking about the good stuff. He doesn't see the bad things. You know what I mean? He's cocky, he's arrogant. That's what you want in a cornerback. You know, that's what makes him great. Did you have one more thing to add, Mark?
Just on free safeties. Now, and free safeties that get paid. There's predominantly, I would say, 3 types of free safety. There's a split free safety who takes over his half of the field, and they'll have a strong safety who takes over the strong side of the field. There's a free safety nickel, someone like Tyrann Mathieu who can play free safety, but will also drop down into nickel, which means you can stay in the base package. You know, you can keep all your linebackers on, but he'll be tasked up with following that third wide receiver. And then the final one, the position which is getting paid, the one which is hard to find, is your single high safety. And your single high safety is, as it sounds, he's the only one who's up high. That can be called centre fielders. Think of them as like a sweeper in football, you know, in soccer terms. Think of him as like a sweeper. He's the one who's playing at the top, and he's a centre fielder. And he's tasked with making plays sideline to sideline. He can be covering the left cornerback, you know what I mean, and making up for him if he's beating press in coverage, or double teaming if it's a double team assignment. Or he can make him plays on the other side. You know, like, so what they've got to do is they've got to judge the flight of the ball and look at where the cornerback's in that situation, whilst also looking for other chaos from the cornerback and the quarterback and reading their eyes and stuff like that. So Justin Simmons, you know, like, he's getting paid. He got paid. Jesse Bates at the Cincinnati Bengals, he got paid. You know what I mean? Before those two guys, there was Earl Thomas, you know, who was a middle fielder. But when I think of the best 2 free safeties in the NFL, Justin Simmons, Jesse Bates, 1 and 2 for me.
Yeah, it's Earl Thomas, absolutely fantastic. Cam Chancellor, oh God, fantastic safeties. So that's covered all the positions. Let's move on to some good defenses emerging, and obviously ones that, as Mark uses, are in the bin fire. So Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we're going to come to JP. You know, obviously they started off quite slow last season, but you really saw them drive into their own, you know, on into the Super Bowl run, you know, especially with Todd Bowles, you know, like we were on about blitzes earlier. That guy loves a blitz. So JP, Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, well, we put it in the good, so obviously it must still be good. What do you think about it?
It's an interesting one. Todd Bowles is he's the epitome of a coordinator that probably never should have become a head coach. He's a bit like Monty Kiffin, actually, who's also ex-Tampa as well. That Tampa defense, to me, that is, I mean, I don't want to relitigate an argument from the chat on this pod, but I think you have to acknowledge that defense has been good for a while. It's just, and that team was always on the edge of being a good team. There was obviously, you know, they obviously went over that this year, but I think that defense has been good for a long time. They've got ridiculous athletes. You think about Shaq Barrett, Devin White, those type of players. These are just guys that can impact a game anytime they want. And I think I might have been one of the only people in the lead up to the Super Bowl that genuinely thought they would win it, because I thought they could get after Kansas. I didn't expect what would happen to happen. I didn't really think that Kansas's O-line would crumble that much, but I did think that they could impact the game. Obviously, Shaq Barrett had a pretty huge game. I think a few of them did, really. And to add to that now, they're building strength on strength because they've just gone out and drafted another pass rusher who seems to have had a pretty good preseason. It's an all-round good defense, and they're in a nice position as a team where they can continue to add to it because ultimately the offense is kind of taking care of itself. They've paid most of the guys. You know, they've got a quarterback potentially for the next 2 years who's always going to be in that upper echelon. You know, he should be able to win them some games. So they're able to add strength to that defense and to bring everyone back as well. I thought for sure Shaq Barrett was going to get a massive contract somewhere. But as it is, he's come back. You know, I think that is a tremendous defense for me. Probably one of the best in the league. They've just got a good mix without being, obviously they've got a good pass rush, but without being like particular. You wouldn't look at it and go number one pass rush in the NFL. you wouldn't look at it and go number one coverage team in the NFL. But the mix of the two and the athleticism that they have, I think it makes them a really tough proposition for most teams to play against, because there isn't an obvious weakness there that you would immediately go to if you were playing against them. And I think that's where the Chiefs struggled, is that Andy Reid in particular is very good at targeting weaknesses on opposing defenses. Okay, find me where Tampa's is, because I don't know where it is. So the one thing possibly you could say is the interior. Obviously, they were kind of just patching it up there and hoping for the best. But I think it did work, and ultimately, if you can make the other facets of the defense work, I think they'll continue to be good, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think it's strange that you focused on the front of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because what I think is really good about them is the back end of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Do you know that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, let's say if they're playing nickel predominantly, do you know that all, like 5 of those players have come through the draft for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? They haven't had to bring in a free agent at all in the back end of their defense. All of them were drafted by Sean Murphy Bunton, 2nd rounder in 2019. Jordan Whitehead, their free safety, a 4th rounder in 2018. Carlton Davies, their other corner, a 2nd rounder in 2018. Jamel Dean, a 3rd rounder in 2019. Anton Winfield Jr., a 2nd rounder in 2020. The draft's so good, and what they do, they continually go and draft corners and secondary players. What they did in that period is they went and they would double dip a corner continually. They would double dip at secondary continually. What they looked at is they went, right, you need to have in our division, when you're playing Joe Breeze and you're playing Cam Newton and you're playing players like this, Matt Ryan all the time, and they're airing the ball out and they're pass heavy, we need to be able to cover them. And what we're going to do is we're going to throw multiple darts into the draft, and we'll continue picking in those areas until we land on the players that can play this scheme. To the point now where you look through that secondary and not one of them was acquired through free agency. In fact, they've drafted so well that very few players have been acquired through free agency. They've got obviously Sue. Vita Vea was a 1st round draft pick in 2018. William Golston was a 4th round draft pick in 2013. Jason Pierre-Paul was a free agent. In fact, they traded for him, didn't they? Then you've got Devin White, who was drafted 1st round in 2019. Levante David, who was drafted 2nd round in 2012. And then you've got Shaq Barrett, who again was who was picked up in, in free agency, I think he was. He was an undrafted player, for Denver originally. So what you see, and then obviously you've got the 5 guys I was talking about who were all drafted. So what you've got is you've got a team who's predominantly built their own defense. It's so rare to do in the NFL. What you've got out the starting players is you've got 2 players who have come from outside their own drafting, Jason Pierre-Paul and Shaquille Barrett. And the way they've done that is they've thrown multiple picks at positional areas of need, particularly in the secondary. And what they've went, well, we might have 2 starting corners, but you know what? Let's still go get the next guy. Let's still go get Jamel Dean the year after. And this is what was really good for them in the Super Bowl. They had so many pieces. They could rush the passer. They could shut down Tyreek Hill. They matched up against Travis Kelce because they had a different player for everything. And it's what served them really well in that Super Bowl win. Really good defensive building. And they've got athletes. And they've got a really good defensive coordinator as well. I really like the defensive coordinator that they've got there. He's good. He fielded the Jets as a head coach. But Christ, better people have failed at the Jets. And he hasn't done as bad a job as what Gaze did, the guy who came in and replaced him. You know what I mean? And Robert Saleh's now got that chalice, that poison chalice. Mm-hmm. But you know what I mean? This Tampa Bay defense is for real. For me, it's definitely the best 1 or 2 in the NFL at this moment in time.
Yeah, you were absolutely right to go on the secondary as well. I think the thing I would say to that is if you asked the casual NFL observer who the best DBs in the league were, I don't think many people would name Tampa. That's not to say they're not good, but I think it's just they've managed to build a really good collection of essentially no names at DB. The only reason they've sort of become known names in the last year is because they won the Super Bowl, which I suppose is not a bad thing to be. The one thing I would say, you touched on quite a few draft picks that they made, and something really popped into my head, and it's they cover for attrition. They cover for the natural thing in a season where you're going to lose 2 or 3 players, especially at corner. Corner seems to be one of those scenarios where you're going to lose players every once in a while, and I think they cover for that really well. It feels like they could just slide pieces in and out in that secondary without too much pain. I think you're going to mention Jamal Dean now, so I'll let you go. I'll let you go ahead with that.
Jamal Dean is a superstar in the making on this team. There's 2 players here who come out of Auburn, Carlton Davis and Jamal Dean, and both of them didn't look like the players that the 2 for Tampa, I'll put it that way. Jamal Dean was almost a linebacker playing quarterback. He was that big. Playing cornerback, he was that big. But what he did do, he dropped some weight, and he's a guy who presses at the line of scrimmage. And like you said, John, they've got like Bunty Murphy and they've got Davies who do different things. But Jamal Dean's going to be a superstar in this NFL. I said it when he came in as a rookie. He had to play the back end of the season, and he was shutting down people like Michael Thomas when nobody was shutting down Michael Thomas. You know what I mean? And I automatically thought, oh, this guy looks in the NFL like he didn't look in college. You know what I mean? He lost a bit of weight, but he was still 6'3", 6'4", long and strong, and could bang people and jam them at the line of scrimmage. So they couldn't get off him. They couldn't get off him. We could press them into the ground. And I really like him. I think he's for me, the standout corner in this Tampa Bay defense. Antoine Wilson Jr. is also a terrific player. I thought he had an amazing rookie year, and I can't wait to see him in his second year. But Jamal Dean, for me, is going to be a superstar in the making. He'll get a big contract when his time's due.
If Mark's mentioned Auburn, I'm going to throw out a couple of Huskies. Obviously, you mentioned Vita Vea. He only played 5 games last year. He came in for the Super Bowl late on. He's a fantastic nose tackle, defensive tackle. If he can stay fit all next year, he'll shore up that middle part of it. And we've all seen what Joe Tryon can do, in these preseason. I know it's only preseason, but I saw him do that for Washington for all of last year and the year before. He's such a good player. It just goes on what Mark was saying about drafting. They just seem to get the drafting right, Tampa Bay over the last few years. So moving on from the reigning Super Bowl champions, we've got the Steelers in there, as a good defense. Bones, you want to pick up on the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers is a good one because I think it comes back to something we mentioned earlier. You don't get as much pass rush anymore in the league, but if there's one team that I think of when it comes to pass rush and blitzing, it's the Blitzburg Steelers. It's a team that historically has had quite a pass rush heavy team, and I think that still exists within this team, and I think they're a good example of what you can achieve with pass rushers in this day and age. And I also think they've dedicated an amount of capital to having good pass rush. And we're still waiting to see TJ Watt get paid, but TJ Watt is gonna get paid. We were talking about free safeties and versatile free safeties before, and I can't believe he didn't get mentioned. But one of the best versatile safeties in the league is Minkah Fitzpatrick, who plays for the Steelers. They've historically had really good safeties. Troy Polamalu as one of the most famous names that ever played for the Steelers, really at that position. I think, that team historically it prides itself on its defense and on its blitzing specifically and its ability to get to the pass rush. And I think there's still a really good example of that in this day and age. I didn't want to go on too long, so I'll probably leave it at that.
Go for it, Mark. Steelers.
Sorry, I'm on mute. It's so hard, this thing, isn't it? Let's take ourselves on mute. Let's put ourselves on mute. But hey, it was my suggestion anyway. When I think of the Steelers, who I think who doesn't get sung enough about on this team? Cameron Hayward. Cameron Hayward, the guy out of Ohio who they drafted. And he's been there a lot of years now. And he's just so key to what they do, when we look at the success of what, in this team, it's a lot of it's down to what Cameron Hayward does. He's a big-bodied, he's a typical edge of what you look for in the Steelers who play this, 3-4 front. I just think he's a really good player. He's been in the NFL a while now, and he's only just started getting Pro Bowls and recognition now, But yeah, he's 32 now. They've got another guy opposite him called Stephen Tuitt who came out of Notre Dame. He's another player who I think is really key. What makes the Steelers pass rush successful really is that front three. They play it so well, particularly Hayward and Tuitt. So good at eating up double teams. So good. And the thing is with these two guys as well, is Haywood actually is a good pass rusher as well. You know, like he was drafted in the first round. And I'm just trying to get his stats up. Because I know that his sacks have went up in recent years. You know, like, so if you give us a couple of seconds, I'll get them up. But yeah, what he can do is he can actually create pressure on the quarterback in this 3-4 alignment, which actually isn't normally asked for. And he does it well. You've talked about Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think he's brilliant, Bones. You know, the reason why I didn't mention him is because I knew that you would anyway. Yeah, I mean, over the since 2017, going back to Haywood, because I've got his stats now, 12 sacks that year, 2018, 8 sacks, 2019, 9 sacks. Then last year he had 4 sacks. But when you're playing a 3-4 defense, and one of your front three who's tasked with eating up double teams has got the ability to get double figures in sacks, just an amazing skill set. And often I think him and Tua are the unsung heroes of this Steelers defense.
Yeah, I think before we move on to the emerging one, I think 49ers for John are stuck in the middle of a good defense and an emerging, you know, obviously with injuries. I think I mentioned earlier how important sometimes to get to the Super Bowl, your defenses can get you there. And I think John can vouch that when 49ers went on their Super Bowl run with, I can't remember, 3 years ago now or 2 years, I can't remember now.
2019. Yeah, 2019.
When they went on their Super Bowl run, how important they were. And I'll let John speak about them, but obviously, if they can get everyone on the field, we know how good they're going to be, don't we, John?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. When you look around, nobody really seems to be talking about us as a good defense. But I find it a bit strange because most of the pieces that were on the team 2 years ago are still there. The only major ones that have left really are Sherman and DeForest Buckner. Now, those are 2 good players, don't get me wrong, but I think there's a real good defense there waiting to happen. If everyone can stay on the field, that D-line is probably one of the deepest in the league. I think we ended up keeping 11 D linemen on the 53-man roster, which is insane. We got Fred Warner, who, you know, he's just been paid. We talked about Warner earlier. I think he's probably one of the best linebackers in the league. DBs is a bit sketchy. I think I've said that before on this pod, but there's enough there to like. You know, Jason Verrett had a superb season last year. If he can stay healthy, I think he's a Pro Bowl candidate this year, although hopefully he doesn't get to play in it because that means we'll be in a Super Bowl. But, yeah, there's him and obviously the safeties. Jimmy Ward, I think, is an underrated player. I think he does his job without any fuss, really. We talked about the single high. He plays a lot of single high safety for us. I think in typically American terms, they call him the eraser on the defense. His job is to take things out when basically it gets beyond the line. But I think you start looking at that team, you start looking at Nick Bosa, Kinlaw, Armstead, D Ford, assuming he's healthy, guys like Warner. There's a real potential for a good defense there. D'Amico Ryans is obviously taking over as DC. I can see where there's some reluctance there. He's a first-time defensive coordinator. But I think he's going to be more aggressive, and I think we're going to come after teams. And I think we're going to surprise a few people because I don't think a lot of people are ranking us high up there at the minute. But I really like us right now, and I did want to just chuck us in. I think they are between good and emerging just because of all the injuries. I don't think anybody really knows what that team's going to look like until they're actually out on the field. But if I was a betting man, which I'm not, but I know you three are, I think we're going to be. I think we're going to be up there as one of the better defenses this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you can keep everyone healthy on that defense, especially, I think that you'll be in the playoffs, and who knows where it'll go from there. So moving on to emerging, Mark with Washington, and going to talk many of things. But I look at that front four, all first round picks, Mark. You know, look at that team. What do you think about Washington?
Well, I mean, Ron Rivera's been able to build defense everywhere he's been. You know, like he was defensive coordinator. I remember way back when he was defensive coordinator of the Chicago Bears, and they went to the Super Bowl that year with Lovie Smith. You know what I mean? You can build a good defense, can Ron Rivera. You know, that Bears defense that year was really good. Of course, it took him a while to get a head coaching gig, and he did, and he got in Carolina, and guess what? He built a good defense. You know, and he's gone to Washington, and true to form, he's built a good defense along with Jack Del Rio there, who was his defensive coordinator. What they've done is basically is exactly what you said. They've went out and they've acquired a defensive front made up of first rounders. You know, like, and they're brilliant. You know that. I mean, Jonathan Allen's just been paid. He came out of Alabama. You've got Deron Payne next to him. He came out of Alabama. Then you've got Montez Sweat, who was a first rounder on one side of the edge, and you've got Chase Young, who was an absolute freak of nature and is going to be the next best thing edge. You know, if not this year, then very soon. I just love Chase Young. He's an absolute beast. Try stopping him. It's impossible. I would say him and Myles Garrett are the best two PR 4-3 edges in the NFL today. Take your pick which one you want, because both of them are absolutely unreal. You know, yeah, and they're just a well put together team. You know, what they have done is they've built the opposite way to what I would. They have built from the front to back. But I wouldn't complain because they're getting results out of it. I do think that back end's still a bit suspect. They have went out and acquired William Jackson III from the Bengals there, who will play one of their cornerback spots. They've got Kendall Fuller on the other side of them. And last year, they found a real good player in Cameron Curl in the 7th round of the draft. They spent another first-round pick on a linebacker this year. This time it was Jamin Davis, who they drafted in the 1st round. So they're trying to become this defensive team. And at this moment in time, they're all what we call emerging, but it's because all the pieces are young. I think that they've got the potential. And if today someone was saying to me, Mark, who's got the best defensive line in the NFL? The Washington Redskins would be the team that I would pick. All 4 of them can put pressure on the cornerback, and all 4 of them are really, very good. That's why they went in the 1st round.
Yeah, I think they're one of the main reasons why Washington did so well last season. You know, like I know it's silly to say because they felt they finished with a losing record, but they kept them in games for most of the season, really. And if it wasn't for them, I think it could have been a lot worse last year. Moving on to another defense that looks like it's going to be good in the next few years. It's the Cleveland Browns, and I just look at this defense and like it was okay anyway, but what they've done this year, you know, like in the draft and free agency is unreal. And it just every time I look at this team, I just feel that this is a Super Bowl run, like written all over it this year or next year. You know, like Mark mentioned, you've got Myles Garrett there, unbelievable pass rusher. You know, like he'd be if second list if you're going to pick a pass rusher in the NFL. Inches of like John Johnson and Troy Hill from like the Rams that they picked up. Quite annoying for a Seahawk fan that they've got Malik McDowell, and he looks like in the preseason, he looks like the player that the Seahawks drafted. He looks really good at the moment. We'll see how that goes over the season. And they picked up people like Greg Newsome and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in the draft. This defense looks like it's going to be good for a few years if they can keep all these guys together. Bones, are you in the same camp?
Yeah, I think you touched on a few good points there that are very true of the Browns right now. Like Myles Garrett, great on the edge. On the other side, they picked up Jadeveon Clowney on a 1-year deal from Tennessee, who is, I guess it'll be similar to the Cam Hayward situation in the Steelers, where he might not have the production Garrett's going to have, but he will reinforce what Garrett does by adding pressure from the other side. Like he'll be a good piece in that defense. You already mentioned Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah looks. I think if he's not playing much this year, he will be in future years. This guy is going to be good for this defense. Like Greg Newsome at cornerback, another like great player like out of the draft that they drafted so well this year. Like you said, they made some great moves this year, and I think you just can't argue with what they've got on paper. Like whether it all comes together on the field, like there's a lot of teams that when we look at them, we can say, well, on paper, this is fantastic. Like, and then somehow it just doesn't fit, which doesn't seem like the Browns seem to be on the up and up and up at the moment. So I hope it continues for them. But yeah, no, I think they've made some great moves, and I can't wait. Again, as someone who watches linebackers in the draft, I really like Koramoah. I really like Owusu-Koramoah. JOK, he looks great. I wanted him as well this year. I would have had any of these linebackers that people took.
Do you know what I think about when I think of the Browns? Just how deep their defensive roster is. You know, they went out and they got Troy Hill, the corner, in free agency. They weren't content with that. They went and got Greg Newsome in the 1st round of the draft. You know, they've got Denzel Ward, who's already a Pro Bowler. They've got Greg Newsome, who's a 1st rounder. They've got Greedy Williams, who was spent, from LSU, who was the second rounder. And then they've got Troy Hill, who was a big ticket free agent. That's 4 very good cornerbacks that they've got there. On the defensive line, they've got Myles Garrett, they've got Jadeveon Clowney. Malik McDowell is being rescued in Cleveland at this moment in time. You'll know him, Jordan. He was the second rounder who had a terrible all-terrain vehicle accident in Seattle, which really derailed his career. But yet the Browns have got him and he's on there. He's still a high-round pedigree kind of player. I just read this year that Pat McKinley has made their squad. You know what I mean? Or there's another edge rusher with first-round pedigree. It's deep. This Browns defense is deep. And I think even if they do lose a corner, if they do lose a pass rusher, an injury, for example, they're going to have that next man up mentality, and they've got a lot of upside in their next man up.
Yeah, I totally agree. Moving on to bad defenses. Obviously, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders in there, and I'm going to come back to Mark. And remember, Mark, we've got to move on to New York Jets as well. We've got to give them some time as well. And I'll just throw in that there is some breaking news that Mark and JP broke, that it looks like that the Raiders are signing KJ Wright. I think JP said to a 1-year deal. I think it is. I'm not too sure what it is. Is that going to make them better, Mark?
Yeah, will do, because what they've got is if they've got Tanner Muse on that base package. And what Tanner Muse is, he's a safety at Clemson who they were going to turn into a linebacker. And whilst his speed's very good, he plays at about 220 pounds, which means in goal line packages, I wouldn't fancy him very much. You know what I mean? Though, when there's a running back going at him, he hasn't got that stop on the goal line kind of power. You know what I mean? So his game's built on speed and agility, being a safety converted. And I think what KJ Wright does, and Denzel Perryman, is they both come in with experience of this system. Like our veteran defensive player, Corey Littleton, on that linebacking corp, hasn't played in a cover 3. You know what I mean? Or he doesn't know the cover 3 system. And what we got is we've now got Denzel Perryman. And we've also now got, KJ Wright, who made their name in that cover 3 system, I like the addition. I mean, the defense is going to be better this year. I'll keep it quick. They're going to be better for one thing. They're going to be better because they've got Gus Bradley. You know what I mean? And he's brought in players who know his system as well. Obviously, we've just talked about Denzel Perryman. We've just talked about KJ Wright, which is important in them linebacking positions. But one of the positions that I think is just as important is cornerback, and he brought across Casey Hayward from the Chargers, who can play in that system. But largely, this defense is very, very short on talent. We're just talking about, Wright and Hayward, who are both north of 30. I think Wright's 32. I think Hayward might be the same. Yannick Ngakoue was our big ticket free agent who was brought in. But he hasn't really impressed in the last few years. He's got a lot to prove. Although I think his best football came at the Jags under Gus Bradley. What we'll have is we've put draft capital into defense, but we've just drafted poorly. We were talking about Damon Arnett, whose birthday it is today, on our private chat. Damon Arnett's 25 years of age. It's his second year as an NFL pro. To put that into context, Denzel Ward's a whole year younger than him, age 24, and he's going into his 4th year as an NFL pro. Jalen Ramsey is a whole year older than Damon Arnett. Jalen Ramsey's 26, Damon Arnett's 25. Jalen Ramsey was drafted in 2017. So you're getting an idea here, you know what I mean? Where the Raiders have just drafted terribly, and I just don't rate Damon Arnett. I think he's short arm, stubby. He's not an athlete. He's not fast. And he wasn't a particularly good corner or higher. And I still think it was one of the worst picks we've made over the last decade. And I won't have anybody else tell us differently. I think he's a waste of time, and I think he's a bum. But that aside, this Raiders defense will be better, but there's a lot of pressure being put on young heads. We're having to see a lot of players make a jump up for it to be good. Do I think it's going to be even in the middle pack of defenses this year? No. But what I hope to see us around the 20th mark. 19, 20, 21 will do for me.
Oh, it was quite positive, actually, that, to be honest with you, Mark. I thought we were going to be worse than that. So it's caught me off guard. So the other one that we've got on the bad is the New York Jets. Obviously, John knows the guy that's gone over there, Salah. Looking at the Jets defense, I can see why we've put it on bad. Bones, any positives? Do you see anything there?
No, not really. The problem the Jets have, I think, is barring the Quentin Williams pick in 2019, the Jets seemingly have invested essentially nothing on the defensive side of the ball in terms of draft capital or off-season pickups. Like this year, for example, they picked up a couple of players, but none of them earlier than the 5th round. And it looks like at this point they've probably got 2 6th rounders as starters going into this year. Which, all right, we always say like there are people in the draft that get picked in the 6th, 5th, 6th round that might make the team eventually, but first-year starters in the 6th round and that you've barely got anyone behind them is not a good thing. Like they picked up Gerard Davis, that was one of our players that was taken earlier than he probably should have been and was just a disaster throughout his career, his time at Detroit, as far as I'm concerned. Like, he was not a good linebacker. He's like a starting linebacker for them, and maybe in this scheme he'll fit better. He didn't fit in our scheme very well at all. He wasn't drafted to play the way we played, and it was due to all the Detroit coach switches. These things happen at Detroit. Like, you end up with players who don't fit the scheme at all on your depth chart. Like, what do we do with this guy? Like, so, but no, I mean, it just doesn't look great for them, does it? There's just not a lot there. It feels like they've not invested anything in the last sort of few years in their draft on the defensive side. I think that's a big problem for them at this point, and I hope Salah's got different mind for them. I think that's part of why Salah's been maybe picked up as the new head coach, is they've looked at the defensive side of the ball this year and gone, God, this isn't great. Like, and maybe in the future this is going to improve.
Do you agree with that, JP? Is can Salah work with this team? Is there anything to work with?
We don't really know the answer to that question. I think this is one of the things. People talk about how good a defensive coordinator Robert Saleh was. And yeah, okay, we did well. But I mean, look at the players he was working with. He's got nothing like that at the Jets, with the possible exception of Williams right now. I think he can turn them around. It's not going to happen this year. I think a lot of people think that he's going to somehow... I think sometimes people get caught up in the idea that if they hire a coach that's done well elsewhere, he could turn their average roster, and I don't even know if it's fair to call it an average roster, into a good one. I think it's going to look a lot like year one at the 49ers for Salah. We were awful on defense that year. We had nothing to speak of. What he needs to get in there is probably some veteran leadership, people that understand how he wants to play the game. I'm not seeing that on this roster as I look at it right now. I think CJ Mosley is probably the nearest thing they've got. But even he's switching schemes, or switched schemes rather, when he signed for them. It's not like he's a natural fit in that team. He's trying to make a good case. I think what might happen, knowing what he did with our D-line, I think there's going to be a no-name on the Jets that racks up a bunch of sacks just because there is nobody else, with the possible exception of maybe Williams. But Williams is playing inside, so maybe one of the edge players is going to do something unexpected. But there's no... unless they start investing some capital in that defense, it's not going to be a quick turnaround, I don't think.
Sorry about that, Jets fans. We've just finished by... not really giving you any positives on your defense there. So we'll quickly move on. So obviously this week it were the final cuts down to the 53-man rosters. Obviously this time next week we'll all be getting ready for the first game, of the NFL season. So I thought we'd just have a quick look, obviously the surprise cuts, and obviously the big one, like for me, I don't know if you guys was as surprised as me, was obviously Cam Newton. Just before I jump into your guys' opinions on it, I will listen to the GM Shuffle podcast with Michael Lombardi, and he made a fantastic point about it, saying that obviously Mac Jones has clearly beat him out, and obviously Cam Newton is an alpha. He was saying he's an alpha player. Is he going to fit in by just sitting on the bench? Brian Hoyer is there. He knows his place and stuff like that. And this is what he was mentioning, saying that Cam Newton had to move on, because what you're looking at as a GM and stuff, he was saying, there's all keeping everyone happy in that locker room. It's like a family. And as soon as you've got someone who doesn't know his role, it's going to cause rifts between everything and stuff like that. So that's opinion of cutting Cam Newton. I'll come to you first, Mark, because you was shaking your head. I don't know if you're in agreement on stuff. So what do you think about the Cam Newton? Were you shocked, and what's your opinion on it?
No, I was nodding my head. I agree. Okay. I haven't listened to the GM Shuffle this week, so I'll go back and listen to it. But it does make absolute sense. If you go in with a rookie you now have to support that rookie. And having someone like Cam on the bench would just overshadow him. You have to allow Mac Jones to become the leader of that dressing room. And when you've got an alpha like Cam Newton, he's just going to prevent Mac Jones growing into that leadership role. And also as well, it's completely different styles. The two completely different styles of quarterback. So I think if you're going with someone like Mac Jones, which I have decided to do, and let's face it, the rookie beat him out. He got COVID, and they got to see that rookie in series after series after series, and he beat him out, and they've made that decision. Yeah, cutting Cam makes absolute sense because one, he's not a stylistic fit, and two, he's not a personality fit for what you want. You now want Mac Jones to become a leader. He wouldn't have been able to do that with Cam Newton there. Too much of an alpha.
Call me Nostradamus because I picked this guy up. I picked Mac Jones up in our Dynasty League because after that first week, I had that feeling after that first week. I've talked about him every week when we talked about people in the preseason that we've been watching. Every week, I've wanted to talk about Mac Jones because I think you saw it in the tape. Like, not only does he fit what New England have always done way better than Cam. Like, New England don't need a power runner. It's not 1990 something anymore. Like, no one needs a power running quarterback anymore. I'm sorry, Cam Newton. Like, I'm sorry, but it's true. Like, it's gone. But no, in all seriousness, Mac looks clearly the better quarterback for the New England scheme, and I think it's right. I think that's the perfect explanation for it as well. Is Cam's mentality isn't going to work well with this situation, and like locker room, the way the locker room feels about the team is a huge part of winning dynamics in the NFL these days. You hear players talk about it all the time. Is the locker room environment is huge. So yeah, I can see why making that cut was necessary, and I'm not like Mac just looks so much better than Cam did in that offense. I'm sorry.
I think we all predicted that to a certain degree. We said when they drafted Mac Jones, well, I know I did. I've been quite disparaging about him during the process because I thought we were going to take him at 3. He's the perfect fit for the Patriots. And I think this is a classic Patriots move. I was more surprised that people were surprised. If they think Mac Jones is the quarterback, they were going to do this. It's not beyond the realms of things they've done before. They've cut starters on the team before heading into the regular season. Belichick does not care. If he thinks it's the right move for the team, he will do it. And I think one of the key points is as soon as you are a distraction to the mission at the New England Patriots, as soon as you are a bigger story than the team, you're in trouble. It's the whole thing. I mean, even talking, you guys have talked about him being like an alpha sort of guy. Yeah, that's fair enough. I think they can get along with that. They've had those sort of plays. You think about guys like Rodney Harrison and people like that. But I think what kind of probably annoyed Belichick, to be perfectly honest, is all the circus surrounding the vaccination issue with Newton. I think he's just decided that if he's not going to play for me, I'm not going to sit him on the bench 16 weeks of the year with everybody asking about his vaccination status because he's always wearing a mask and he keeps saying it's a personal matter, which is shorthand for I haven't been vaccinated. It's similar to when people won't tell you they voted for it. It means they voted Tory. So, he's had enough of it. And I don't blame him. I think he's done the right thing for his team. The future of that team is Mac Jones, and it's that's the way it is.
I have to say, I don't know about the COVID thing. I have to just quickly jump in. Did you not hear what Bill has said in a press conference this week where he's like, oh, well, it's possible to be double vaccinated and still get COVID. So, I mean, we'll see how that all plays out kind of thing. Like, he also came out and said that, like, COVID vaccination status didn't play any into it. So just to play devil's advocate and throw that out there.
I considered saying, and I'm sort of glad I didn't because I want us to stay on YouTube, anybody who looks into certain political causes that Bill Belichick has donated to may be inclined to think that he might be anti-vaccination. That's about the most I can say without us getting in any shit. So maybe I am wrong on that, but I do actually think if there's a bit of a media circus following him, regardless of his own views on it, I think he's inclined to go, I don't need to deal with this. So I wasn't that surprised that he was cut, really.
I think, I don't know if anyone else has got any guys that another surprise off him. I'm not saying a mega surprise, but Jacob Hollister being cut by the Bills, I don't think their tight end room is massive. I don't know if he's going to be signed back to the practice squad. I don't know. This is the thing over the next few days. People will be signed back. People will take chances, so things can go around. But I thought last year for us, it was decent enough as a tight end. He caught six catches for 558 yards. I thought I can't think of it. It shows you about the Bills. I think I can only remember Dawson Knox. I'm sure they've got another tight end on the roster, but I can't remember his name. So he might come back to the practice squad. So we'll watch that and see what happens. But Mark, did you have any surprises for you?
Not really. I mean, the Raiders cut Derek Carrier. It was a surprise to me. I don't think anybody else has probably heard of Derek Carrier before. But he was a bit of John's put his hand up. He was a bit of a middle. He was a bit Darren Waller and a bit of Foster Moreau, as in he could block and he could also catch. Not do any amazingly, but do both well. And I thought he was a really good third tight end in our system. But the cut Derek Carrier, got cut and we kept Bowers on instead. Obviously the young lad beat him out. I was a little bit surprised that Carl Joseph was let go after we paid him to come back, and paid him £1 million, in bonus money to come back, to then cut him later on. Begin, he was clearly beat out, by guys who Gus Familiar was more familiar with, a teamer, he had before, and the rookie Gillespie, So, yeah, there was a few cuts on the Raiders that surprises them to being the most too. But to be honest with you, not overall. There's been a few good waiver selections so far. I saw that the Cowboys went and got Will Grier off waivers, who was cut by the Carolina Panthers. He was a former third-round pick. They didn't really have anything at all behind Dak Prescott. And I think that Will Grier obviously has some upside. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been taken in the third round of the draft. So, they've went and got him as insurance. I actually think Cam could be a good fit in Dallas, because Dak is the guy there. But Cam does have a little bit of a Dak skill set, and because Dak's been injured just the year before, and he's got a labrum injury again at this moment in time, I do think that Dak could be a fit for that Cam could be a fit for the Cowboys. People are also going to link him to Washington because of Ron Rivera. But the truth of the matter is, I think if he goes into Washington, it opens up a quarterback battle, which is not really what you want to be doing a few weeks away from the season. I think they're kind of settled on Ryan Fitzpatrick now, and bringing Cam in will just bring on a quarterback battle. And in training camp, you want them, but you don't want them 2 weeks before the season kicks off. So where will Cam end up? I'm thinking Cowboys is maybe a good bet. Yeah, but nothing really of note on other teams' rosters. But a couple from the Raiders, I guess.
I think at this point in the year, when the 53-man cut happens, it is worth pointing out and remembering that some of these cuts that might look a bit out of place, and you might be like, well, that's a bit of a weird, I wonder why we've cut that guy. Some of these cuts genuinely could be because the 53-man deadline and the injury roster deadline don't actually match up at all. And some teams will cut players they don't think anyone's going to pick up and move players to the IR and then bring those players straight back in, like almost immediately as soon as the IR is set. So some of the players where you're like, oh, it's a bit of a head scratcher. Like, why have they dropped this player when they might come back in a few weeks? You never know.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I imagine that's why the Raiders have signed KJ Wright. If you put on a player on IR before the 53-man roster is named, it means that they're out for the entire season. If you allocate a player to your roster and your 53 and then you put them on IR, it means that they can return later on in the season and play some part. And I imagine that's what we've done with Javon White. Javon White had an injury in the preseason, probably going to miss 6 or 7 weeks maybe. So what they'll do is they'll name him on the 53. I imagine now we've signed KJ Wright, Javon White will be on IR, because they'll hope that they can bring him back at some point in the season. They don't want to write offers full year. So that's a really good point that you're making there, Bones. You know what I mean? About teams and how their rosters are done and stuff like that. Yeah, sometimes they will just cut players who won't come back. Will come back, you know what I mean? And of course, there's players who make the practice squads. The practice squads are a lot deeper this year. I think you're about 12 players this year. And what they used to be, we've got a couple of young running backs who were really good, Edmonds and Vegas, who we obviously felt quite comfortable cutting, knowing that they would come back to our practice squad. We've got Jalen Richard, who's our third running back, who I think must be on the hot seat. I'm not entirely sure. He might be on a churn. We might see one of these young developmental running backs, I'm guessing Vegas, come in at the back end of the season and replacing Jalen Richard. But yeah, it's this 53-man roster never stays the same. The bottom 3 players on it are continually churned, and you'll see teams make transactions continually throughout the season and adding players to the bottom of that roster. But yeah, it's still an exciting part. Do you know what I missed this year? The trades. Normally at this point of year, when teams are cutting down their 53-man rosters, normally there's a flurry of trades. I thought I might have seen Zach Ertz get traded away from the Eagles. It didn't happen. Maybe he really is content there. Yeah, I mean, that was a bit of a surprise, wasn't it? Like, I did expect some more trade, things to be happening, but not a big day for trades this camp cut game, was it?
I think a lot of the trades now have moved to the trade deadline or close to it because teams decide they're out of contention, start trying to get something for players that maybe aren't going to stick around. But I agree, I expected a few more. An interesting cut for me that I spotted today. I to be honest, when it comes to 53-man roster today, unless there's something that hits national news like Cam, I'm generally focusing on my own team. But I did spot an interesting one. Washington cut Peyton Barber, who was in their running back room. Now, I obviously on offensive breakout players picked Antonio Gibson, who's the starter there, but we said it in the context of them having a pretty deep running back room. I think we said the same when we did the NFC East podcast as well. I was a bit surprised he went. They must think he has absolutely nothing left. A couple of other guys, they cut people that have played quite considerable minutes for them. Jimmy Moreland, who has started quite a few games at corner for them and certainly played in a lot of games, played a lot of nickel for them. He's gone as well. So it's kind of left them working with a bunch of rookies at corner and inexperienced players, which is interesting. But it's Ron Rivera. I get the feeling he's trying to make a little bit of a statement, trying to make it look a bit like a meritocracy. Every NFL coach says it's a meritocracy, but if it was, some players probably still wouldn't be in the league. But sometimes the contracts can shield you from that. But yeah, I thought they were a little bit surprising. But other than that, I didn't see any that made me that shocked, really.
I think the Peyton Barber one, obviously, it's a guy that I've been banging the drum up for a while now. I think, coming out of the draft, and Jarrett Patterson has impressed a lot, in the preseason games. I think he's going to be the backup to Gibson with, obviously, you've got JT McKissick there as well, So, yeah, I think that was the main reason they let him go. I think they see some good stuff in him, and I'm a big fan of him as well. I think the Lions picked up Kadell Hodge, didn't they, as well, from the Browns? I thought that could be a decent pickup for them. He's not a bad wide receiver. And a guy that I just want to ask John about, because I just saw a lot of 49ers fans, I wouldn't say necessarily negative and stuff, they wanted to keep Dakota Shepley. I think like I said, I don't know much about him, to be honest with you. I just saw a lot of talk of him, like wanting a lot of fans wanting him to stay at the 49ers and thought he'd make the squad.
Yeah, he's a guard. We made some strange decisions. He was one of them. Colton McKivitz, who we drafted in the 5th 2 years ago, I think, seemed to have a pretty strong preseason, but he's gone, and they've kept Tom Compton, who's like a veteran guard, who, to be honest, I was surprised they kept him on the roster. There must be a reason for it. I don't know if it's positional versatility. That can save a lot of people's jobs. Yeah, I was surprised. I wasn't surprised that you guys picked him up. You seem to pick somebody up off us every year. But, it's worked out quite well for you, hasn't it, with a couple? So I can totally understand why. But, yeah, it was an odd cut. We actually, weirdly, we lost the most players to waivers in the league. I think we had 3 players claim, which is quite rare. Shows how deep we are in certain areas, or perhaps how much game time we gave some of the younger players in preseason that sort of helped them be showcased. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how he goes with you guys. Obviously, he's going to Tom Cable, who likes to build up sort of unheralded players. He was pretty, he was a CFL player. He's got experience playing the game. He's been pretty good in most of his stops. It'd be interesting to see how he goes in Seattle.
Yeah, hopefully he can help with the offensive line, and even if it comes in as like cover something better than what we've got there at the moment, I'd say, by sounds of it. So yeah, I think we've covered everything. Obviously, we've gone over a bit longer than we normally do. I hope that you've enjoyed it. And I think I haven't even talked to the guys about next week, but I'm going to throw it out there and think that next week we might do like some kind of prediction. You know, like obviously we're going to be a few hours when we start before the season starts. Maybe looking at a few teams that I think playoffs, few teams that made the playoffs last year that'll maybe drop out, and I think we'll do something along them ends as long as. When we come off the pod, these lot don't snap my head off and say, no, we're not doing that. We're doing something else. But we'll see it. So we'll see you at the same time next week. And like I said, we'll only be a few hours away from the NFL season starting. Cowboys, Buccaneers should be a cracker. So see you next week, guys.